Good night.
No, not yet.
Oh, I must. Because at this time of the night I have no sense.
Is that a fact?
She was not just a woman. She was a phenomenon, a glittering paradox wrapped in satin and sorrow. Marlene Dietrich, born in 1901 in Berlin, would become one of the most enigmatic figures in the history of cinema, a goddess of light who lived much of her life in the shadows. To the world, she was the Blue Angel, the alluring siren who bewitched both men and women with a single gaze, a smoky voice, and a defiance that dared to challenge her time. But behind those perfectly arched brows and the sequined gowns lay something deeper, a profound loneliness that not even the applause of millions could silence. Dietrich's name became synonymous with glamour. She reinvented sensuality in an era bound by rules. She blurred gender lines before it was fashionable, dressed in men's tuxedos, sang of love and loss, and made the world believe that confidence was her armor. Yet, as her fame soared to celestial heights, her heart descended into solitude. She became the first great symbol of Hollywood's seductive cruelty, how it exalts its icons only to leave them stranded once the lights go dim. To her fans, she was divine. To her daughter, she was distant. To herself, she was something else entirely. A woman caught between two worlds, Germany and America, love and duty, youth and decay. And as the years passed, she would become a prisoner of her own legend, trapped in the reflection of the woman she once was. Her story is one of triumph and tragedy, of a woman who lived by her own rules but paid dearly for her independence. She defied the Nazis, entertained Allied troops on the front lines, and became a symbol of resistance. But she was never truly at peace. Fame brought her everything except the one thing she could never reclaim, her sense of belonging. So who was Marlene Dietrich really? Was she the seductress the camera adored, or the lonely exile who died alone in a Paris apartment, her curtains forever closed to the sunlight? Was she the rebel who shaped her destiny, or the fragile soul who couldn't escape her own myth? This is not just the story of a Hollywood star. It's the story of a woman who refused to be ordinary, a woman who lived for love but found heartbreak, who sang for peace but lived in inner war, and who, even decades after her death, still haunts the memory of cinema as the eternal question: can anyone truly be free inside the golden cage of fame? As we unravel her life, from a strict German upbringing to the dazzling lights of Hollywood, from wartime courage to reclusive sorrow, one truth will echo louder than applause. Marlene Dietrich was not just a legend. She was a lesson in how brilliance often burns the brightest just before it fades. Early life and family background. A childhood of silence and shadows. Marlene Dietrich was born Marie Magdalena Dietrich on December 27, 1901, in Schöneberg, Berlin, Germany, a world on the edge of both modernity and destruction. Her early life, often described as privileged, was anything but emotionally warm. Her father, Louis Erich Otto Dietrich, was a police lieutenant, stern, disciplined, a product of Prussian order. Her mother, Wilhelmina Elisabeth Josephine Felsing, came from a prosperous family of watchmakers.
But beneath the surface of respectability, their home was ruled by distance rather than affection. When Marlene was only 6, her father died in an accident during his military service. That loss, sudden and profound, left an invisible crack in her heart, one that would echo through every performance, every love affair, every song of longing she would later sing. Her mother remarried a man who never truly filled that void, and young Marlene quickly learned the art of emotional disguise. The laughter, the smiles, the charm, all would become tools of survival in a world where sensitivity was seen as weakness. From a young age, she showed an unusual fascination with music and transformation. She studied the violin and dreamed of becoming a concert musician, practicing for hours until her fingers bled. But as fate often does, her ambitions collided with life's unpredictability. When she injured her wrist at 17, her dream of becoming a professional violinist ended abruptly, a quiet tragedy that marked her first encounter with loss. Yet that same year, she found solace in another art form, the theater. Berlin in the 1920s was no ordinary city. It was a storm of decadence, freedom, and artistic rebellion. In that chaos, young Marlene, tall, mysterious, and ambitious, began to find her place. She enrolled at Max Reinhardt's prestigious drama school, one of the most influential training grounds in Europe. There, she learned the craft of illusion, how to control her body, her voice, her emotions, lessons that would one day make her the epitome of cinematic mystique. Yet beneath her growing confidence was a restless spirit, a girl searching for control in a world that often silenced women. She learned early that beauty could open doors, but it could also close them. She was aware of her allure, but she was even more aware of its power and the danger of being consumed by it. Her early performances on stage were small, often uncredited, but they gave her something she never had before, the power to be seen. Family life remained complicated. Her mother, pragmatic and emotionally restrained, never understood Marlene's hunger for expression. Their relationship was cordial but distant, bound by duty rather than affection. Marlene would later describe her childhood as respectable but cold, a life of proper manners and unspoken grief. That emotional austerity, the feeling of always performing, even at home, would follow her forever. As World War I reshaped Europe, the Dietrich household, like many, faced scarcity and fear. Marlene watched her country fall into ruin and her people lose hope. The sound of sirens and the sight of wounded soldiers left imprints on her young heart. It was here that her lifelong empathy for pain and her fascination with the fragility of human spirit began. By the end of her teenage years, she had already learned 3 hard lessons: that love is fleeting, that freedom comes at a price, and that survival often means hiding your true self. Those lessons would form the foundation of the woman she would become: seductive, yet guarded, fearless, yet wounded. Before the world knew her as Marlene Dietrich, she was simply Marie, a girl standing at the crossroads of tragedy and transformation, ready to trade her innocence for immortality.
First steps, struggles. Becoming Marlene, the mask before the mirror. When Marlene Dietrich stepped onto the stage for the first time, she was not yet the icon who would hypnotize the world with her smoky gaze and defiant poise. She was still Marie, a young woman struggling to define herself in a Germany torn apart by war, poverty, and moral decay. It was a Berlin she entered as an actress in the 1920s was a city of contradictions, elegant yet corrupt, broken yet alive. It was a place where the wounded came to forget and the dreamers came to escape. Her earliest work was in chorus lines and small theater productions, where she played nameless girls in glittering dresses, dancing under cheap lights that flickered like false promises. She worked tirelessly, often for little pay, and shared rooms with other struggling performers who lived off cigarettes and coffee. She endured endless rejection. Casting directors told her she was too tall, too strong, too unconventional. Her beauty was not the sweet, innocent kind that audiences adored. It was sharp, almost androgynous, filled with a knowingness that made people uneasy. In those years, she began to craft what would later become her armor, the Marlene Dietrich persona. The cool detachment, the half-smile, the cigarette poised between her fingers, all were born out of survival. "If they won't love me for who I am," she once said, "I'll make them love me for who I become." It was not vanity, it was defiance. She took small film roles in Germany during the silent era, appearing in movies like Tragedy of Love, 1923, and Café Electric, 1927. They were minor parts, often forgettable, but they taught her something crucial, that the camera loved her in ways people did not. She realized that film had the power to capture emotion without words, and she, with her mysterious face and piercing eyes, could speak volumes in silence. During this time, Marlene married Rudolf Sieber, an assistant director she met during filming. It was a marriage of convenience more than passion, and though they would remain legally married until his death, they soon lived separate lives. Theirs was an arrangement, one of affection perhaps, but not of romance. Marlene's heart, restless and curious, belonged not to a man, but to her art and her freedom. The late 1920s were a test of endurance. The German film industry was in flux, and as talkies emerged, many actors lost their careers. Marlene feared she might be next. She faced rejection after rejection, spending long nights in Berlin cabarets, performing songs for drunken audiences who barely listened. Yet those smoky rooms became her classroom. She learned to control attention, how to make silence louder than sound, how to hold the gaze until it burned. It was there, under dim lights and the haze of smoke, that fate found her. Director Josef von Sternberg attended one of her performances and saw something others had missed, a dangerous mix of sensuality and sorrow, wrapped in an aura that defied definition. He offered her a role in The Blue Angel, Der Blaue Engel, 1930, the film that would change her life forever. But before that transformation, there was struggle, deep, private, and unrelenting. Dietrich felt caught between two worlds, the respectable woman expected by society, and the rebellious spirit craving liberation. She defied gender norms, often wearing men's suits in public, a scandalous act at the time. "I am not a man, nor a woman. I am what I choose to be," she once remarked. That simple statement became her silent manifesto. Even as she prepared for The Blue Angel, she doubted herself. She was nearing 30, an age when many actresses were told they were finished. Her confidence was fragile, her finances unstable, and her country on the brink of disaster. Berlin was falling into chaos as political extremism rose. Amid all that, Marlene was still just a performer chasing a fragile dream, unaware that within a year she would be transformed into an international legend.
Those early years left scars she never healed from. Every song she sang, every role she played, carried the echo of those struggles, the sleepless nights, the rejections, the feeling of being almost seen. It was in those struggles that Marlene Dietrich was born, not just the actress, but the myth. When the cameras would finally roll on the Blue Angel, she was no longer the young girl who dreamed of playing the violin. She was a woman who had learned to weaponize heartbreak and turn it into art.
Breakthrough moment. The birth of an icon. From Berlin's smoke to Hollywood's light. Everything changed in 1930 when Marlene Dietrich walked into the set of The Blue Angel. It was more than a role. It was an awakening, a transformation, the moment when a struggling cabaret performer became a timeless symbol of seduction, strength, and sorrow. The director, Josef von Sternenberg, had seen something in her that no one else did, a spark of melancholy beneath the glamour, an intelligence behind the allure. When he cast her as Lola Lola, the sultry nightclub singer who ruins a respectable man with her charm, he was not just making a film. He was sculpting an immortal image. From the moment Marlene appeared in that black corset and top hat, singing Falling in Love Again, cinema itself seemed to pause and watch. The smoky lighting, the slow turn of her head, the lazy drawl of her voice. It wasn't performance, it was confession. She didn't play Lola, she was Lola. Seductive, cynical, heartbroken. For audiences around the world, this was their introduction to Marlene Dietrich, the woman who could look into the camera and make you believe she'd seen the very soul of desire and despair. The film became an international sensation, propelling her from the dim cabarets of Berlin to the dazzling lights of Hollywood. Paramount Pictures immediately offered her a contract, hailing her as the new Garbo. But where Greta Garbo embodied mystery and silence, Dietrich embodied provocation, a woman who dared to blur every line. When Marlene arrived in Hollywood, she was 29, a late start by the standards of stardom. Yet she carried herself like someone who had been famous all her life. Von Sternenberg followed her there, and together they created one of the most remarkable artistic partnerships in cinema history. He became her mentor, her director, her sculptor, sometimes cruel, always brilliant. He understood her like few ever would. Under his direction, she became something new, not just an actress, but a living work of art. Their collaborations, Morocco 1930, Dishonored 1931, Shanghai Express 1932, Blonde Venus 1932, and The Scarlet Empress 1934, defined an era. Each film pushed the boundaries of sexuality, gender, and power. In Morocco, she famously kissed a woman on screen, a moment so shocking for its time that it became an act of rebellion disguised as art. She blurred the line between male and female, between seducer and victim, between sinner and saint. Hollywood was mesmerized. So were audiences. But while the world saw glamour, Marlene saw something else: control. She learned to direct the light, to craft her own image, to dictate how she would be seen. No man, not even von Sternenberg, could fully define her. Behind her soft-spoken demeanor, she was calculating, fiercely intelligent, and determined to survive in an industry that consumed women and discarded them when they aged. Her fame skyrocketed. She became the highest-paid actress in Hollywood, appearing on magazine covers across the globe. Her image, the half-lit face, the tailored suit, the knowing smirk, became a visual language of power and seduction. But with every new success, something deeper began to fade. The more she built her legend, the further she drifted from herself. Her relationship with von Sternenberg grew tense. What began as mutual admiration turned into obsession.
He demanded total control of her look, her voice, her soul. He shaped the lighting so precisely that even her eyelashes cast a deliberate shadow. Marlene tolerated it, understanding that this painful symbiosis was also the key to her immortality, but she knew it couldn't last. By the mid-1930s, their partnership began to unravel. The Devil is a Woman, their final film together, was both a masterpiece and a farewell. It was as if they both knew that the magic they had created could never be repeated, and that its cost had been enormous. When the lights dimmed on their collaboration, Marlene stood alone, more famous than ever, yet more isolated than she had ever been. Hollywood worshipped her, Europe envied her, and women admired her strength. But the woman who had once danced in Berlin's cabarets now found herself trapped in an illusion she had helped create, a goddess in exile. Her breakthrough had given her everything: wealth, acclaim, immortality. But it had also taken away something irreplaceable: her anonymity, her innocence, her belonging. The world no longer saw Marie from Berlin. It only saw Marlene Dietrich, the untouchable star who belonged to no one, not even herself. And though she smiled for the cameras, deep down she knew the truth, that every dazzling spotlight comes with a shadow.
Peak career and achievements. The golden goddess, power, provocation, and the price of perfection. By the mid-1930s, Marlene Dietrich was no longer just a movie star. She was a myth. Every studio executive wanted her face on their posters. Every fashion designer studied her silhouette, and every journalist wanted to decode her mystery. She was Hollywood's most dangerous woman, not because of scandal, but because she refused to play by anyone's rules. In an age when women in cinema were expected to be delicate, compliant, and innocent, Marlene built her empire on contradiction. She could be seductive yet untouchable, icy yet vulnerable, masculine yet deeply feminine. Her beauty wasn't the fragile kind. It was architectural, sculpted with precision, and lit by her own understanding of shadows. She learned where every camera should sit, how every light should fall. On set, she wasn't just the actress. She was her own cinematographer, her own director, her own mythmaker. Her films in this era became cinematic poetry. In Shanghai Express, 1932, she played a woman known as Shanghai Lily, a character who embodied her entire essence, a courtesan who hides pain behind poise, who wields desire as both weapon and shield. The line, "It took more than one man to change my name to Shanghai Lily," became not just dialogue, it became a declaration of power. With each film, Dietrich evolved. In Desire, 1936, and Angel, 1937, she combined sophistication with sorrow, the sparkle of diamonds with the ache of loneliness. She had transcended the idea of mere stardom. She was now art. Even directors beyond von Sternberg sought her magic, knowing she could transform even a simple scene into an eternal image. Yet her reign came with danger. Hollywood, fickle as ever, began to turn against her. By the late 1930s, her films struggled at the box office. Critics whispered that her time was over. The industry that had once crowned her the most glamorous woman alive now branded her box office poison. But Marlene refused to fade quietly. When many stars would have retreated, she reinvented herself. And it was World War II that revealed the true depth of her courage.
Born in Germany, she had every reason and every opportunity to remain neutral, but Marlene chose defiance. She rejected Hitler's invitation to return to Germany as a symbol of Aryan pride. Instead, she became one of the first major stars to openly denounce the Nazi regime. Her decision came at a personal cost. She was branded a traitor in her homeland, her name cursed in German propaganda. But to her, morality mattered more than image. She took the uniform of the U.S. Army, performing tirelessly for Allied soldiers across North Africa and Europe. She sang under gunfire, entertained troops in freezing tents, and walked through bombed cities, not as a star, but as a soldier of spirit. One of the soldiers once said, "When Marlene sang, we forgot we were at war." That was her power, to give beauty even in the ruins. Her performance of Lily Marlene, a haunting wartime ballad of love and loss, became the unofficial anthem for soldiers on both sides of the conflict. It was ironic, almost tragic. The same song that comforted Germans also soothed the Allies, as if her voice transcended ideology, becoming something purely human. When the war ended, Marlene received the Medal of Freedom from the United States and France's Légion d'honneur, honors not just for her talent, but her courage. Yet while the world celebrated her, she quietly mourned the country that had once been her home. She could never return to Germany without fear or guilt. The cost of her integrity was exile. Still, she continued to dazzle. In the post-war years, she reinvented herself yet again, this time as a global stage performer. Her one-woman cabaret shows in the 1950s and 1960s were unlike anything the world had seen. Dressed in glittering gowns or tuxedos, she sang with aching intimacy, her voice now deepened by time and sorrow. Cities like Paris, London, and New York worshipped her. Her performances were sold-out events attended by kings, presidents, poets, and dreamers. Yet behind the glamour, every song she sang, "Where Have All the Flowers Gone?", "Falling in Love Again", and "Lily Marlene", carried the ache of someone who had lived too many lives and belonged to none. To the world, she was Marlene Dietrich, the eternal star. To herself, she was still Maria from Berlin, a woman searching for home in a world that only wanted her image. Personal life and challenges, the woman behind the mask, love, loneliness, and the price of immortality. Behind the shimmering gowns, the legendary cheekbones, and the defiant cigarette smoke, Marlene Dietrich carried a loneliness that no spotlight could erase. Her life, as much as it was gilded in fame and applause, was built upon contradictions, a woman who was desired by millions, yet truly known by none. For all her lovers, her admirers, her soldiers, her audiences, she remained an enigma. In private, Marlene was not the icy goddess she portrayed on screen, but a woman who longed, often desperately, for connection. Her early marriage to Rudolf Sieber in 1923 was never a fairy tale. It was a partnership of necessity, not romance. The two separated soon after the birth of their daughter, Maria Riva, though they never formally divorced. She would refer to him with loyalty and affection, but their marriage became a symbolic gesture, one that shielded her from scandal while she explored the freedom that fame offered her. And that freedom was radical for its time. Dietrich lived her love life without apology. She had affairs with both men and women, an open truth in private circles, but one the public only whispered about. Her relationships with Gary Cooper, John Gilbert, and Ernest Hemingway became the stuff of legend.
Hemingway called her the most exciting woman I've ever known. But there were others, women whose names history only half remembers, women who found in her a kind of courage to exist authentically in a repressive world. Still, beneath the elegance and rebellion, Marlene carried a wound that never truly healed, the ache of being an outsider. Hollywood adored her, but it never fully embraced her. She was too European, too intellectual, too mysterious for America's idea of a star. And in Germany, the country that birthed her, she became a pariah for rejecting Hitler's regime. When she performed for Allied troops, Nazi radio called her a traitor. Friends from her youth turned their backs on her. Her name was banned from German cinemas. For years, she lived between nations, never belonging to any. Even in her personal relationships, she oscillated between intimacy and isolation. She could be fiercely devoted, yet emotionally distant, capable of immense tenderness, yet terrified of vulnerability. Her daughter, Maria, would later describe her as both loving and demanding, a mother who wanted perfection not out of cruelty, but out of fear. Fear that imperfection might shatter the illusion she had worked so hard to build. The image of Marlene Dietrich was her armor. She created it meticulously. The tailored suits, the smoky voice, the glacial stare, the precise lighting on her face. Everything was designed to project control. But that control was also her prison. She once confessed, "I am not a woman. I am an image." In her private letters, a different Marlene emerged, softer, wistful, nostalgic. She wrote of sleepless nights, of memories of Berlin, of longing for a home that no longer existed. Her correspondence with Hemingway revealed a woman both strong and fragile. She once wrote, "I wish sometimes I could simply be held, but I don't know how to let go of being Marlene." The more she chased perfection, the more it consumed her. Her beauty, once her weapon, became her obsession. She lived in constant fear of aging, refusing to appear in public without carefully orchestrated lighting or makeup. Mirrors became enemies. Plastic surgery, once taboo, became her secret ritual, a desperate attempt to preserve the goddess the world demanded her to be. And yet, there were moments when she allowed the mask to slip. During her stage performances in the 1950s and 60s, after the final encore, she would often sit in her dressing room for hours, smoking in silence. The applause would still echo in her ears, yet she felt utterly alone. She once said, "The applause is for her." She pointed at a photo of herself in costume. "Not for me." Her daughter later recalled that Marlene's greatest tragedy was her inability to stop performing, not just on stage, but in life. Every interaction, every dinner, every friendship was a scene, every smile a pose. Even love became a performance, scripted by fear of rejection. And when those she loved inevitably left, as they always did, she would retreat deeper into her constructed solitude. Her loneliness was not the ordinary kind. It was cosmic. The loneliness of a woman who had become larger than life and could no longer fit inside it. She was adored, but never held. Remembered, but never understood. As the years went on, her isolation deepened. Old lovers died, friends drifted away, and her body, once the envy of millions, began to betray her. She hid from cameras, refused interviews, and eventually withdrew almost completely from public life. The woman who once commanded the world's attention now lived behind the drawn curtains of a Paris apartment, answering the phone only to a select few. There, in her final decades, the legend of Marlene Dietrich lived on, but the woman herself disappeared. Behind every diamond she wore
There was a tear never shed in public. Behind every song she sang, there was a line meant for someone who never returned. Behind every role, every defiant gaze, every photograph, there was the same quiet truth. Marlene Dietrich was never chasing fame. She was chasing love. And somehow, in the process, she lost both.
Later years. Decline. The goddess in the shadows. The agony of being forgotten. By the 1970s, the untouchable Marlene Dietrich, the woman who had redefined elegance, defied politics, and enchanted both Hollywood and the battlefield, had begun to vanish from the world she once ruled. Her name was still whispered with reverence. Her films still glowed in black and white glory, but the woman herself was receding like a figure fading from an old reel of film. The glittering spotlight that had defined her existence for half a century now felt like a ghostly echo of a life lived in perpetual performance. Her last major public appearance came in 1978, during her final concert tour. She arrived on stage, draped in her signature gowns, still mesmerizing in her control of light and gesture. But beneath the glamour, there were tremors of fragility. Age had crept into her movements. Her legs, once graceful as silk, now trembled beneath the sequins. She would later confess to friends that she could no longer bear the scrutiny of being seen. Each show became an act of endurance rather than joy, a painful attempt to prove that Marlene Dietrich, the eternal goddess, still existed. When she finally retired from performing, it wasn't with fanfare, but with silence. There was no farewell tour, no televised goodbye, no grand exit, only a quiet disappearance. By the early 1980s, she had retreated entirely into her apartment at 12 Avenue Montaigne in Paris, drawing the curtains closed and rarely opening them again. For the next decade, she would live almost entirely in seclusion, a shadow haunting her own legend. The woman who once danced under chandeliers now lived in near darkness. Visitors were few and carefully chosen. Her phone calls became her only connection to the world, often long, philosophical, and filled with melancholy reminiscence. She spoke with her daughter, Maria, occasionally with old lovers, sometimes with journalists who still dared to reach out, but she refused all invitations, appearances, or photographs. She simply said, "I am finished. The world no longer needs to see me." Her withdrawal was not born merely of vanity, but of pain, physical and emotional. She suffered from frail health, arthritis, and the long-term consequences of injuries sustained during her performances. Years of corsets, heels, and relentless touring had taken a toll on her body. The glamour that once seemed effortless had been carved from sacrifice. Now that same perfection exacted its price. In public memory, Dietrich remained the eternal seductress, but behind closed doors, she was an old woman confined to bed, battling both her body and her memories. Her nurses would later recall that she spent hours listening to recordings of her own songs, sometimes smiling, sometimes weeping. The sound of her younger self, that smoky, commanding voice, seemed to comfort and torment her in equal measure. Yet, even in her solitude, she maintained control over her image. Every visitor was instructed to address her as Miss Dietrich. The lighting in her apartment was always soft, her bed positioned carefully to avoid harsh daylight.
She remained a director, even in decline, orchestrating how the world would remember her, stage managing her own disappearance. The emotional isolation was devastating. She missed her daughter, yet their relationship had always been complicated, marked by both love and resentment. Maria's memoirs revealed a portrait of a mother who could be affectionate one moment and cold the next, who demanded loyalty but gave little vulnerability in return. In Paris, Dietrich followed Maria's life from afar, reading about her in newspapers, sending rare letters filled with both pride and veiled reproach. In her final years, there were moments of bitter reflection. She often spoke about Germany, the homeland that had both made and exiled her. When a journalist once asked her if she would ever return, she replied, "To Germany, I have no country. I am a world citizen without a home." It was not arrogance, but heartbreak. The war had taken from her not only her youth, but her identity. She had fought against fascism, stood with the Allies, and paid for it with decades of alienation. Even after Germany sought to honor her, she refused to go back. The wound was too deep. In those years of solitude, the line between the woman and the myth blurred entirely. She became both prisoner and guardian of her own legend. Old reels of her films were occasionally broadcast, and audiences marveled at the same hypnotic eyes and husky voice, unaware that their star lay only miles away, listening in silence. She once told a friend over the phone, "It is strange to watch your own ghost on television." By the time the 1990s dawned, Marlene Dietrich had almost completely withdrawn from life. She refused cameras, interviews, and even sunlight. Her curtains remained drawn, her world reduced to a single room filled with old photographs, letters, and the faded perfume. That same perfume she once wore on red carpets now lingered only on the pillows beside her bed. On May 6, 1992, Marlene Dietrich passed away quietly in her Paris apartment. There were no flashing cameras, no grand orchestra, no final performance. The world learned of her death through a brief news bulletin. And just like that, the last great goddess of the silver screen was gone. Her funeral was modest, held in Berlin, the city she had both loved and lost. She was buried beside her mother, as she had once requested. Crowds gathered, some with flowers, some with tears, others with awe, as if witnessing the closing of an era. In the end, Marlene Dietrich's greatest tragedy was not her aging nor her isolation, but her invisibility. The woman who once was the brightest light in the room spent her last decade in darkness, unseen, unheard, and largely forgotten by the world she helped define. Yet in that darkness there was a strange kind of poetry. The silence she left behind was not empty. It was the echo of a life that had burned too brightly for too long. Marlene Dietrich did not fade. She chose to disappear, to become the legend she had spent her entire life creating. Because for her, death was not the end. It was simply the curtain falling on the longest performance ever given. And the audience, even now, is still applauding.
Legacy and symbolism. The woman who became immortal. The enduring spell of Marlene Dietrich. When Marlene Dietrich left this world in 1992, she did not simply pass away. She transformed into something eternal. Her body may have been buried beneath the quiet soil of Berlin, but her presence refused to vanish. Her shadows still lingered in the silver shimmer of old film reels. Her voice still drifted through smoky recordings, and her influence rippled endlessly across generations of artists, dreamers, and rebels. Dietrich's legacy cannot be measured merely by her movies or her music. It must be felt through the transformation she brought to the very idea of womanhood, performance, and freedom. Long before feminism was a global movement, Marlene lived it, breathed it, embodied it. She was a woman who refused to be confined by gender, nationality, or expectation. She wore men's suits with the same seduction as silk gowns, and in doing so, shattered every rule Hollywood and society had written for women. Her famous tuxedo in Morocco, 1930, remains one of the most iconic fashion moments in film history. When she kissed another woman on screen, a bold act that scandalized audiences of the time, she wasn't just performing, she was declaring artistic independence. That moment became a symbol of liberation, courage, and the beauty of defiance. Even today, nearly a century later, that single kiss is studied as one of cinema's most daring expressions of gender and identity. Beyond fashion and film, Dietrich's true magic lay in her contradictions. She was glamorous but intellectual, seductive yet untouchable, fiercely loyal yet emotionally guarded. She embodied mystery in a way that modern celebrities rarely can. She once said, "I am not a myth, I am a legend." But the truth is, she became both. A myth carefully sculpted by her own will, and a legend sealed by time. Her humanitarian spirit is often overlooked, but remains one of the most powerful aspects of her legacy. During World War II, while many stars chose neutrality, Dietrich took a stand that could have cost her everything. She joined the American war effort, performing for Allied troops, raising war bonds, and even recording anti-Nazi broadcasts in German. Her patriotism to freedom, not to a flag, but to humanity itself, made her one of the few Hollywood stars to be decorated with the U.S. Medal of Freedom and France's Légion d'honneur. She was not just an entertainer, she was a moral compass in a time of chaos. Her courage also paved the way for countless artists who came after her. Icons like Madonna, David Bowie, Lady Gaga, and Tilda Swinton have all drawn from her visual and emotional language. That blend of elegance, androgyny, and danger that became her signature. Each of them, in some form, has recreated Dietrich's spirit. The refusal to fit neatly into categories, the power to reinvent identity as art. Fashion houses continue to worship her aesthetic. The sleek suits of Yves Saint Laurent, the cinematic campaigns of Chanel, and the gender-fluid designs of Gucci all carry traces of Dietrich's rebellion. She transformed clothing from costume into language, a statement of independence whispered through fabric. Her look was not just beauty, it was philosophy. Yet perhaps her most profound legacy is emotional, not visual. Marlene Dietrich taught the world that vulnerability could exist within strength. Beneath her pose and perfection lay a deep understanding of human sorrow. Her performances were never just glamorous displays. They were emotional confessions. In songs like Lily Marlene and Falling in Love Again,
Her voice trembled with longing, weariness, and wisdom. That smoky tone wasn't simply a sound. It was the echo of a woman who had seen too much and still chose to sing. In death, she became a mirror, reflecting not only who she was, but who we wish to be. To women, she remains a symbol of empowerment. To artists, she is proof that image can be rebellion. To dreamers, she is a reminder that one can live by their own rules and still enchant the world. Her story is studied in film schools, quoted in fashion editorials, and revered in queer culture as a beacon of freedom and authenticity. She challenged notions of femininity, patriotism, and sexuality long before it was acceptable to do so. She blurred the lines between actor and character, between performance and reality, and in doing so, she changed both cinema and culture forever. Even her death became part of her artistry. She once said she wanted her last act to be a dignified disappearance, and she succeeded. Her reclusiveness was not weakness, it was control. She wrote her own ending, just as she had written every scene of her life. And when the curtain finally fell, she left behind not a void, but a myth so luminous that it still glows decades later. Today, when you see a star dressed in tailored black, eyes glimmering with mystery and defiance, you are seeing the ghost of Marlene Dietrich. When a singer uses silence as power, or an actress commands attention with stillness instead of words, you are witnessing her influence. She does not simply exist in the past. She lives in every artist who dares to be more than beautiful, every human who refuses to be defined by limits. Marlene Dietrich's life reminds us that art is not about perfection. It is about presence. Her legacy is not only cinematic, it is spiritual. She showed that one can stand against the world and still remain graceful, that one can be both warrior and muse, sinner and saint. Even now, more than 30 years after her death, her name evokes not nostalgia, but awe. She remains a symbol of courage, wrapped in silk, of rebellion, whispered through a song, of a woman who chose her own destiny and made the world bow in silence. Marlene Dietrich, the immortal enigma.
Closing statement. Marlene Dietrich, the legend beyond the spotlight. Marlene Dietrich's story is not merely one of glamour, fame, or artistic achievement. It is a story of contrasts, light and shadow, intimacy and distance, triumph and a profound personal solitude. Behind the glimmering lights of Hollywood premieres, the applause of thousands, and the hushed reverence of critics, there was a woman who carried the weight of a complex inner life, a life of longing, loss, and relentless self-reinvention. To the world, she was perfection incarnate, flawless in posture, voice, and poise. But to herself, she was a constant work in progress, a puzzle that no accolade could fully complete. She was haunted by the ghosts of a childhood steeped in hardship, by the pain of love lost, and by the isolation that came from being extraordinary in an ordinary world. Her life was a delicate balancing act, the soaring highs of cinematic stardom tempered by the quiet ache of private heartbreak. Even as she dazzled audiences with her sensuality, intelligence, and charm, Dietrich endured betrayals, misunderstandings, and the relentless gaze of a society that sought to define her on its terms. Every photograph, every role, every song was both armor and confession, a statement of identity and a shield against exposure. She understood the cost of fame, that immortality in art often comes at the expense of intimacy in life. Yet it was precisely this duality that made her unforgettable. Marlene's strength was inseparable from her vulnerability, her allure from her honesty, her mystique from her humanity. She taught the world that being extraordinary is rarely easy, that brilliance often carries solitude, and that a life of art is a life lived with courage, often in defiance of comfort and convention. Her journey reminds us that true artistry is not confined to performance, but is woven through choices, convictions, and the way one faces the inevitable tragedies of existence. She was fearless in love, audacious in style, unwavering in principle, and endlessly inventive in craft. She did not merely entertain, she transformed. She did not simply live, she created a mythology around her life, one that continues to captivate, inspire, and challenge us decades after her passing. As the curtain falls on her mortal story, what remains is the echo of a life lived without compromise. The voice that once trembled with longing still resonates through recordings. The gaze captured in celluloid still holds power over generations. The courage to stand apart, to embrace both scandal and praise, continues to serve as a beacon for those who dare to defy expectation. Marlene Dietrich's legacy is a testament to resilience, independence, and the beauty of a fiercely authentic life. It is the reminder that behind every iconic image, there is a human story, one of sacrifice, struggle, and profound depth. Her life proves that legend is not born merely from talent, but from a relentless pursuit of truth and self-expression, no matter the cost. Ultimately, Marlene Dietrich was more than an actress, more than a singer, more than a Hollywood icon. She was a living paradox, ethereal yet tangible, strong yet tender, immortal yet profoundly human. She challenged the world, enchanted it, and then on her own terms vanished from it, leaving a shadow so luminous that no age can dim it, no time can erase it. Marlene Dietrich's story is not just of success, stardom, or fame. It is a story of the human condition itself, a story of courage in the face of loneliness, artistry forged from struggle, and the enduring power of living and dying as the fullest expression of oneself. She remains a monument to those who dare to dream boldly, love passionately, and live authentically, reminding us that even legends are, in the end, human. Her final gift to the world was not her films, not her music, nor her style, but the proof that one life lived without compromise and with unyielding authenticity can inspire eternity. Marlene Dietrich, the immortal enigma, lives on.